Hi everyone, it's Vicky here from This Place of Mine. Welcome to the first digital art tutorial in Discord. This evening we're going to look at Hydra, which was the software we used just briefly in Workshop 1. And we're going to think about this life as pixel. So currently I'm waving at you, I'm blurring at the edges, I'm kind of here, but also zeros and ones beaming to your screen. And in this workshop we're going to look at how to use pixels to disrupt what's happening inside your web browser. So just to recap, in the workshop we looked at Hydra and we sort of hacked other people's code, changing some of the numbers, which also changed the animations and the outputs in your laptop. And what we're going to do in this workshop is you're going to write your own code to create your own algorithmic art. Hydra is an online video synthesizer, and you can create any animations you like with just a few simple steps. And don't worry if you haven't coded before, if the thought of coding freaks you out or scares you. It's really easy and we'll guide you through this. So Hydra is based on JavaScript programming language, which is a fairly kind of world-renowned, well-used, and quite an old programming language, used a lot to make websites and games. Hydra was invented by a woman called Olivia Jack, and it's an example of what's called a live coding environment. So live coding simply means that you're coding live, and it means you can change the code at any point and it changes the output and what you see, in this case in terms of pixels and on your screen. So because of that live element, it's used a lot in performance. So you find often musicians will collaborate with artists and create these kind of live experiences. So you're getting this really amazing environment where the music is matched to the visuals. So Hydra is an example of algorithmic art. And this just means that we're using code to generate a series of patterns. In this case, the code is changing what's happening to the pixels on screen. And these loop round and around again and create an evolving pattern. In this first video, we're going to start with some really simple shapes and colours and movements just to get you started. And if you want to go a little bit deeper, we can do that later on. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so the first thing to do is to go to the Hydra platform, which is hydra.ojak.xyz, and there's a link in the chat for that. We're going to close this front page here, and now we're in the platform. So just a quick recap, the kind of options on your top right hand, you've got the little arrow, which is the run button, and that just kind of initiates your code. The upload symbol there is to upload your pictures to Twitter, where you can see other examples of artists' work. We're going to skip the bin for a sec. And the two arrows here, if I press these, this randomizes all the code on screen. So you can kind of bring up different people's code that they've done previously and hack that code. And the dice just changes the numbers within the code itself. But we don't need any of this tonight because we're going to do our own sketches. So I want you to press the bin button, and this will take you to the black page. This is our blank canvas, and we're going to make some algorithmic art. And you can delete this top line because we're going to go through this together. And the first thing I'd like to do is type OSC, close brackets, press enter for a new line, then dot OUT, close brackets. And what these two lines are doing is, OSC is a signal, so it's sending a signal to the screen, and OUT is the output, so it's saying to output that signal to your laptop. So if I press run the code with the triangle, so now we're getting a signal on screen. So OSC stands for oscillator, and an oscillator is something that changes state between 1 and 0. So this is a signal, and in this case it's pixels going between black and white, and we can start to manipulate this signal live in the web browser. So I'm going to type something in between these brackets and see what happens. I'm going to type in 3 and press run the code. So now we've got a very sort of slow gradient happening across screen. So it's a very slow oscillation. You can see it fading from white to black. If I increase that, if I type 0, so 30 oscillations, and press run the code, you can see there's more instances of that oscillator happening across the screen. So this is called the frequency or the amount of oscillations. I'm going to introduce another number. So between the brackets, I'm going to press comma, and I'm going to let's press 2 and run the code. And now the oscillations are happening a lot more quickly, so this is the speed. I'm going to just slow that down because that's a little bit frantic on my eyes. So I'm going to put that as 0.5 and run the code. Okay, so it's a bit slower. And I might also just reduce this back to, let's go for 4. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do now is introduce the third number. And I'm going to put this at, let's go for 3. Run the code. So now we've got this really sort of like beautiful pixel gradient happening across the screen, this colour wash. And what we've got here, we've just written a line of code which is called a function. So a function, so here we've got OSC, that's the name of the function. And in between the brackets, these numbers are called arguments, and they tell the function what's happening and what to do. So for OSC, which is oscillator, the first argument, so in this case number 4, is the frequency. And the second number, the second argument is the speed. And the third argument, in this case, is the colour. So we've just written literally 2 lines of code and made our first kind of pixel-based algorithmic art. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to bring in another line of code. So every time we bring in another function, we have to press dot. And this one we're going to do is called repeat. And between the brackets, I'm going to type 2, close the brackets, and press run the code. And now we've got 2 instances. It's repeated that code twice in our screen. And we can make that a lot of times. So let's press 15, for example. And we're starting to get kind of a pattern happening here across the screen, a bit like a bad TV almost. Okay, I'm going to reduce that back down maybe to, let's go for 8. Actually, let's go for 5. Okay, the next line that I'm going to bring in is called dot rotate. And for this one, I'm going to type, let's just try 3 and see what happens. Run the code. Okay, so now we've got a slight rotation happening on screen. If I put another argument in, let's just see what happens. So we've got this dynamic movement now. So that means in rotate, the first bit of the code is how much it rotates by, and the second number is how fast that happens. So I might just slow down that rotation because again, it's a little bit frantic on my eyes. Okay. The next thing I'm going to try is a function called collide. So it's K-A-L-E-I-D. I always spell this one wrong, so I have to check. Okay, run that code. Whoa, okay. So as you might have guessed, collide stands for kaleidoscope, and we've got this beautiful kaleidoscope instance happening. Great. And what you can do now is you can start to maybe play around with these numbers, and we might bring in another repeat, for example. So let's see what happens. Dot repeat, you can change the order of the code too. So let's go for repeat 2. Okay, right, so now we're getting much more of a pattern-based system. So yeah, have a play around with these, I think, 5 lines of code and see if you can create your own algorithmic art. Okay, so we're going to do one more example with a different signal source. So last time the signal source was OSC, which is oscillator, and this time the signal is going to be called noise, which is a different type of signal. So I've typed noise with the brackets, and then dot out for the output, pressing the run, and we'll see what we get. So now we've got noise signal on the screen. So let's just see how we can change what's happening here with putting numbers into the brackets. So let's try 5 with the noise. It's kind of looks a bit larger and a bit more fading in and out. Let's try a bigger number just to see if there's more impact. Okay, so it's getting a lot more detail, there's a lot more noise happening on screen. So if you want something that's quite kind of slow and kind of almost like a globular view, you might want a lower amount of noise, so I'll press 2. Okay, so that's quite nice, quite atmospheric. We're going to bring in another function, so we always press dot, and this time we're going to use one we haven't used before called colour. So when you type colour, you have to remember that this is the American spelling of colour, because Olivia is American who invented this. and between brackets, and I'm going to just type in some colours. So colours RGB have 3 arguments, so I'm going to put 3 random numbers in: 30, 200, 100. And in another tutorial we'll look a bit more closely about RGB and colours, red, blue and green. Okay, so now we've got a noise pattern with different colours happening on screen. Great, so I'm going to maybe repeat this to start to get a pattern maybe. So repeat, and then I'm going to go with 4 and see what happens. It's hard to see where my run code is. Okay, so now we've got an evolving pattern. Great. And the last thing we're going to do, like before, is bring in that collide option again for the kaleidoscope. So collide, let's see what happens now. Okay, so now we've got this almost like mosaic kaleidoscope function happening. If you think that actually I don't really like that kaleidoscope function, I want to take that out, what you can do is go to the start of that function, that line of code, and just type in 2 forward slashes, and you'll see that it actually goes in kind of a red colour. And if you run the code again, that means that you're going back to where you were before, and it isn't going to run that code, it's sort of leaving it out. So those kind of forward slashes are really important in coding. It means you can type an instruction, you can kind of write a message that isn't going to run as the code, and you can just bring things in and out. So we talked about live coding before. You might have a series of lines of code and want to be bringing in and out different colours or patterns at different points, and you could do that by literally bringing in and out these lines of code, like so, and 2 forward lines, forward slash, and we're there again. Great, okay, so that's example 2, and you can see that example on the handout as well. Great, so I really hope that you enjoyed playing with Hydra, even if it was your first time at coding. And there's loads of ways that you can kind of extend what we did here today. Just let me know if you want to carry on playing with the platform. Some things that you can do which are really quite fun. I've been playing with hacking my webcam, so you can put yourself into the code as well. And you can also sample different websites. Anything that's on your screen can be a feedback loop as well. So we can talk a bit about that in the future, and I can share some different artist examples and ways for you to continue this learning after this tutorial. Thank you.